that funnels to a failing school, what are those parents supposed to do? Hope that's not too tough of a question.
Brian, do we want to have our panelists come up?
Oh
front
yeah,
so we
yeah,
can-
yeah, please. I'm sorry. It's my first time, so you know. So again, zip code shouldn't determine quality of education, but when you live in a quote unquote failing school zip code, and we're gonna say failing is defined by however you want to define it, what are parents supposed to do? Anybody want to try to tackle that question? You know what? Before you even answer, just introduce yourself real quick. Yeah, told you it's my first time. I'm sorry.
I'm Tanya Batts.
Carrie Nixa.
Steve Hennepel.
You have long enough arms. I'm Kathy Fuentes.
I'll start us off. I don't necessarily have the answer. First of all, failing schools, you know, it's a buzzword. And the measure by which we grade our schools is political, you know. So I'm going to answer this from the perspective of what I know about schools that have no resources and such. I come from a long line of Mississippi educators. And what did they do when they didn't have the resources with old books that were donated from around the community that were oftentimes years old, and you know, the community got involved in donating. This is so tough because, you know, no one wants to intentionally send their child to a school that they think is under-resourced or failing and doesn't have what they need, or doesn't think that their child is going to have the best start in life. But many people don't have the choice but to send their children to a school that is defined as failing because it is the closest school to where they live, and they don't have the resources to travel across town. So that's where this idea of sustainable community schools comes in. So when your school doesn't have what it needs, there used to be a system where you could reach out to the community, businesses within your neighborhood, for additional investments in parent engagement and things of that nature. This is a really difficult question, an unfair question. But what do you do when you don't have a choice but to send your child there and do the best that you can? Libraries. It used to be a time where children would go home and have enrichment, you know, encyclopedias on the shelves, books in the schools, but oftentimes we're finding that parents don't even have resources to buy books at home. So that's where I'm thinking community would come in.
Anybody else want to even just address it? If not,
I would say that the framing of you know, failing schools is a little bit simplistic, maybe a little bit problematic. I think that we want to be clear that those of us who are involved in making this film, we're not attempting to criticize or question choices that individual families or individual parents make as individuals. We certainly expect parents to do what's best for their children, but we also expect the entire community to do what's best for all children. And the idea that you can sort of choose your individual way out of the system in which schools are failing is not, that doesn't make things better. It doesn't really fix the problem. If schools are not doing what they should be doing, you know, we should be uniting as communities to make sure that they do and make sure that they get the resources. And that will involve talking to our legislators, and involve working together as groups and as communities to do that. But I think that's a really important thing. We try to make the point that if everyone says, I'm going to choose a different school, I think the school is failing. The other thing is, the school that's failing in one person's eyes or in the eyes of data compiled by the state or a state rating system may not be a school that's failing in everybody's eyes. That may be a loving, welcoming school that serves children, some children very well. And so it's a complicated question. I don't think there's an easy answer, but I think the answer that we need to look for is a broader, more community-based answer, and not just an individual answer.
We're gonna have to get another question.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to respect how much time is chatting. So we'll go to our next question.
Yeah, we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about what goes into starting a charter school, or as they're sometimes called, especially here in Marion County, innovation schools. How does that happen?
All right, so what goes into, well, you have an idea for a school, and then you seek a charter authorizer, which would be a college, university, or the mayor's office if you're in Indianapolis, or I'm trying to think of some others, but you go to a charter authorizer to present your proposal for this new school of an idea. And in Indianapolis, the the idea goes to the charter board. You try to the city council has a charter authorizing or review committee. Not sure what their function is because it really seems interesting. But you essentially present a proposal, then seek out in some cases with an innovation school, shop around ideas to find a building or partnership with a school within that particular district. I'm pretty sure I'm missing some steps, and I do know that there is one person in the audience who can be more detailed in answering this question, but that's essentially what it is.
There's a lot of talk about the achievement gap, specifically the achievement gap amongst, I should say, between white and non-white students. Number one, what does the achievement gap mean? And is that a good and true indicator of a success or a revenue school?
The microphone is a hot potato, and I'm holding it when the question was asked. I think it's a real important question. I think that again, the framing of achievement gaps is based on the idea that test scores tell us a whole lot about just what students are learning. And that is in some ways maybe true, and in some ways maybe not true. There are ways of looking at it. But I do think it's important. I mean, I sort of disagree with some of my public school advocate friends in that I do believe it's important to look at data and to look at the scores and to understand what they mean and what they don't mean. And achievement gaps refer to the difference in proficiency rates between white students and black students. Students are A-lunch students, white students. And those are significant and they're real all across the state. So I think that's something everyone needs to look at, everyone needs to be aware of. And I think there may be other answers besides. There are a lot of ways of looking at it. One that I would get to be talk more about school integration and bringing schools and whether that, I think there's at least some evidence that that's an effective strategy for facing all those things.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree that data is important. The question is, what is the achievement gap, and is it fair to utilize it to close schools? I think that it's an indicator of something that is going well or something that is not going well. But studies after studies have shown that the achievement gap is really an indicator of poverty. It's a poverty gap. And so we're penalizing family school students for being poor. And if you look at the Washington Post as a 2019 study that Stanford did, that even has a map, there's a link in that article to a map that shows you the disparities between test scores, socioeconomics, and then also segregation. And so there's a correlation between those three. And what we're doing is penalizing communities for not having money.
You have to introduce yourself.
Here, my Alzar, I'm the director of student services. I don't know who asked that question. I just want to make sure they understand. We talk about achievement gap. We can't talk about achievement gap without talking about access gap or opportunity gap or health gap or a choice gap. There's a lot of gap going on in our country. So a lot of times that achievement gap is used to deviate from the real discussion of what's going on in our community, in our country. So I just want whoever asked that question, you don't want to focus on that. What's going on with this achievement gap at the school? We need to talk about all the gaps and opportunity gap that we have as a country.
I learn better when I'm fed, when I've had enough sleep, when I'm not anxious about where I'm going to sleep tomorrow night, if my mom or dad is going to come home. These are real issues that students are dealing with, and they're primarily dealt with in concentrated poverty areas.
Thank you for that. This next question, and Tanya, just hold on to the microphone. We're going to come to you first for this one. But as a former charter school parent myself, this is one that is really important to me. Charter schools are frequently closed by their authorizing agencies. What is the impact on students and teachers when these closings occur?
First of all, it's interesting that the ones that approved it are closing the schools. Often there's a recommendation to close before you have to report the data that would show the community that you needed to close because you weren't doing a good job. I'm not an advocate for closing schools because I believe that schools, I believe in improving schools. And if you're bold enough to open a school, regardless of the kind of school it is, then we have a responsibility to ensure that that school is successful. And so what it does to communities, first of all, we're putting nice, shiny new buildings with nice new paint in communities that are, in some communities that are impoverished, blighted, and saying this is the oasis in the desert, so to speak. It devastates communities, it devastates families. Sometimes in the school that I worked at was the only high school in that area because all of the public schools around it had closed. And up popped this new start school that had opened and closed, and the charter school board would disagree with me, but it literally opened and closed by changing its name each time it was coming up for when it was out of the grace period, or there's a certain number of years that you get to be graded on growth only as opposed to growth and proficiency like traditional public schools. And they would open and close right before that started. So students are left oftentimes scrambling for where to go next. And I even had students who, when our school closed, during the summer, they had chosen a school, and weeks before the new school year started, that charter school closed. So it puts children who are dealing with trauma in more traumatized states. And it's interesting how our state legislature often talks about traumatized children. We're trying to do what's equitable for them. And yet we are constantly disrupting the course of their education in not holding these charter operating organizations and authorizers accountable for the schools that they open.
Okay, so this is our last, set question, and there's a question from the audience. But this is very personal to me because I know this has happened to some of my friends and colleagues. But can you explain? So when a student leaves a public school for a charter or voucher school, state funding follows that student. Can you speak on what does less funding mean in terms of progress and operations of that public schools? That's one question. And then two, if that child returns to the public school, either because they just didn't like it or maybe they canceled out, which happens, what happens to the funding?
Well, you know, you saw in the movie that they're talking about the sort of the idea is a backpack full of cash, and the child is the cash cow, and wherever that child goes, the funding will go. But there are fixed costs in a public school, and in order to serve children well and communities well, you need to have stable funding and you need to have resources. So we're talking about like a failing public school, we're talking about a school that's under resourced, we're talking about a school that primarily is going to have children living in poverty and living with the effects of poverty. And so when the child is leaving the public school that is, you know, whose mission it is to educate all children, there's a lack of stability that is happening here as these doors open and close and the funding goes, and you have to start shrinking maybe you know, your class sizes grow because you're doing you know, more with less. And it has an impact, like down in Monroe County, where Bloomington is, we have 2 charter schools in our community. The most recent one was opened in this little rural school district near us in RVB. And it's Seven Oaks Classical School that's been in the newspaper a lot lately. It's a model from Michigan, from Hillsdale College, and they're trying to put these classical models around the country. And when they came to town, we organized our parents to say, please do not bring us in. If you want more classics read, work with your school board and your teachers and make sure that you're getting more of what you want. But when you're talking about funding, leaving our public schools for your choice because you want this, it's going to limit the choices within the public schools for what our kids want, like band or a certified music teacher or smaller class sizes. So, you know, this is the group project we're working on here in democracy is the public schools, right? And the charter, they were trying to get authorization from the Indiana Charter School Board, and they didn't get it. They came back with a different name. No, they didn't. That's another school. But anyway, so then they went to Grace College and Seminary, which is a religious school for a public school that authorized them, and they were able to have and to get authorized to start up in our rural school district here. So now they're at 500 kids. 500 times how much equals how much money coming out of RVB school district and MCCSC school district. And there was a tiny little beloved public school, Steinsville. It was like the last vestige of Steinsville's town. And people were, and the school board of RVB decided that they just couldn't afford to keep it open. They lost students, they lost funding to this charter school in their community. And their parents were screaming at their school board, how dare you close our beloved school? This is the heart of our community. By gosh, I'm mad at you, and we're going to that charter school that just opened up down the road. And they took their funding and their children out of the school district, and they went to that charter school. So this always reminds me of a Dr. Seuss book of like Mr. McMonkey McBean comes in with his star-on machine and leaves with all the cash. And everybody's trying to figure out who has stars on ours and what's the best way to go about it. That's my answer.
And then if a student were to return to that public school.
Yeah.
What happens with them?
It depends on the count date. We have 2 count dates, right? So they come back. Superintendents will tell you after the count date in the fall, they'll see a whole bunch of students suddenly showing up at their door. There is no funding for those students when they come back. The funding stays back in the charter school until the next count date, then they count again in the spring, right? We have 2 count dates now. But the other thing too is that when charter schools say they're gonna open for a certain number of students and the state gives them money, there's nobody watching and saying, hey, you didn't get that many students, you have 12. You said you were gonna have 250. The star off machine's walking away with the money, and there are no checks and balances for getting that funding back of our tax dollars.
Okay, thank you. That was our last question, so we'll open up to people in the audience. I'll bring the mic to you, sir. I wanted to get you out by 8:30, but we're a little bit behind. But we will stay as long as you need, so.
That's right. I can speak it. So just to piggyback off what you just said, just an FYI, literally 10 minutes north of here, Hillsdale.
Yeah, that's
By Orchard Park.
I know that guy.
Oldest elementary school park.
Yes.
Hillsdale, correct me if I'm wrong.
Another class.
No, is it that 1776 curriculum? That was based off the 1776 commission?
Would Kathy, maybe, would you be able to speak a little bit to, the laws that exist about charter schools being able to use vacant public school buildings and how that works?
Don't let one empty. Well, you can't tell, you know better than I do.
The law, I think it's 2019, I believe, that says that if this public school closes, the law, I think from 2019 says if a public school closes, that a charter school can basically claim it, take ownership of it, or lease it, either buy it for $1 or rent it for $1 a year. And so any public school district that closes a school, that's because the school maybe has outlived its usefulness, or they reconfigured the grade networks or something like that, or possibly because they've lost enrollment. Then they are required by law to report that to the state board, or to the State Department of Education, which then lets charter schools know here's an available school, you can lay claim to it, and then if more than one lays claim to it, there's a process for deciding which one gets it. And so of course, I'd say from my perspective of law with this is that those buildings were paid for by tax dollars, property tax dollars that were accrued by the school board and elected school board typically to express the will of the community. And so that board should have the ability to then dispose of that building in the way that's in the interest of the school corporation. So that ability has been taken away instead of the building can just be taken to the charter school. And it hasn't happened a lot for a variety of reasons, but it has happened some, and that's what the gentleman mentioned is currently what could happen in Carmel, I believe, and it's happening for sure in South some other places as well.
Well, Carmel shot themselves, but if they abandoned that school, which part is. Then we could build another. Now they.
Brian, I was gonna go back to your zip code question.
Yes.
It would think that Lawrence Township, Pike Township, IPS, and our district all have what we call open borders. In other words, we allow students from other districts to enroll in our school. So again, the answer would be, if you, for example, we had a failing school in our district, parent could choose, like Lawrence, IPS, apply and enroll their students there. And then they would be going to a school that would support their students, but also with the same guidelines, same expectations that all of us operate under, unlike the charter schools or the parochial schools that again get to pick and choose who they accept when families look to enroll.
Thank you. Any other questions? You need a mic.
I just really hate the term failing school though. And it's a stigmatizing term, and it's stigmatizing children with some of the, that are living in crisis, and they're amazing teachers that are doing beautiful things for them every day. And so I think that when we're talking about a failing school, this is a failure of ourselves as a society to fix the problems that these kids are living and growing in. And so I really encourage us not to use the word failing school. We can use the word under-resourced school, and we can talk about whose responsibility it is. Because, if you start saying it's about my individual, I've got mine, I'm my child, I'm a person, this education reform was supposed to be a solution for the problem that they're making worse, right? And so I think that it's really important to talk about, I as a white woman who's educated, like these policies that we're talking about, it's my kid's school is not where Teach for America is coming with their 5 weeks of training. And so we need to really talk about that, right? Like, for whose kid are you trying to help? And, public schools, Nicole Hannah Jones says that if schools had if we had fulfilled the promise of public education, it wouldn't have been ripe for the picking for privatizers to come in and offer these solutions. So here we are as, I'm a school board member in my county. You do your best to make sure that you're putting resources in, that you have the mind and an eye toward equity. so that the promise of public education works for all children. But we have that accountability through our publicly elected board.
So I've heard the term failing school a lot, right? So can you talk a little bit about what determines what that actually is? Is it graduation rates, is it test scores, is it, you know, I hear a lot about, you know, we look at the data. Who determines the data? One, and is that consistent or is it self-serving? And then the second part is, how do you explain if a kid goes to a charter school and returning to a public school, doesn't have the necessary requirements to graduate, but that counts against public school? Make it make sense.
It depends on what your goal is. What was the goal of that policy? Was the goal of that policy to prove that public schools are failing so that you can make more money off charter schools or enhance your private religious education? Or was your goal really to help all children within that public school system? Because a lot of people look at me confused. They're like, well, why do you have this punitive law that's going on in our state that is affecting children in poverty so much more, children, and it is because they told us, you heard it in the movie, they told us a certain way. This was only about, you know, just a few set communities that this was going to affect. And in fact, now we're looking at billions of dollars that are not accountable, that are not in public hands being transparent. So it's not a fair game. So I guess that my answer for you would be that it's rigged. And then the test scores is also another thing. That is such a limited punitive policy piece to look at what is failing only by this small measurement. Because like Don Tanya said, if you were sleeping in your car last night, this morning you're not going to be caring about long division. And it certainly isn't the fault of the teacher who is coming or the school who are trying to help these children.
Well, I think a school administrator would have a better answer in regards, or someone from IDOE in regards to all the bits and pieces that go into the formula for determining the grade for a school. In the past few years, they haven't been able to do the grades, right? Wait for the past couple of years because of the pandemic. And then there are separate rules for various schools. As you said, the charter schools that are young, they don't get graded the same as a regular school. And so when you look at all the grades, they're all, it's marketing. It's marketing. I believe the data is bunk. It's ridiculous for us parents, us consumers, because this is a consumer market now. It's not, we want it to be for the common good, but they've made it a consumer market by ranking and rating, and you go on greatschools.com, you go on niche.com, you go on the IDOE website, InView, formerly Compass, and there's all this data. And my recent post, if you go and look at all the data from every side, it's inconsistent. It doesn't match. And so we're getting a different story. There is real accurate data out there, but what the consumer sees is not quite true. And so I know, would you like to add to this? Okay, but what's important is, as we said, if it's a failing school, it may be failing in the eyes of the parameters, but it actually might be a good school. It might have great teachers who are working really hard with these students, and it's just the measurements that are being used don't really tell the true story. You have to do the legwork when you're looking for a good school, because we move a lot, and we go into new communities, and we're like, oh gosh, we gotta buy it, we gotta find a house or a rental in a good school district, and we crave good. We want to be good parents. We want the best and stuff. This is very common of us. And so you have to call, you have to, talk to parents, PTO, follow them on Facebook. Man, public schools do amazing marketing right now. And I hate to call it marketing, but they share amazing stories Facebook of what is happening in these classrooms. Adorable things, you know, like chicks hatching in a kindergarten classroom, or like field trips to like, and these are field trips that are back, because, you know, COVID, we didn't have field trips for a while, but like, you know, traditional field trips that kids every year go on, and like, it's part of the community. I feel like I've gone off topic, and it's like probably almost time to go. Karen, pass to you.
When you said marketing, the school that I worked at that closed was the A-rated school on the east side of town. And yet we closed because of test scores, because we really weren't an A school. We were actually a failing school, as one would say. And they were under-resourced, didn't have books, and yet these salaries, the funding, the information, board notes, was not readily available. They didn't have them on the website. I had to call and ask. The notice, there was like a sheen on the window of our school door that they would put the notice on. So if you weren't looking and you didn't know what to look for, you didn't know that there was going to be a school board meeting because it was not posted on the website. In looking at it from the front door, you could miss it very quickly. But so looking at the data, most of the money went towards salaries. And not teacher salaries either.
I hate to be jaded, but I feel like a good number of the charter school system that we're surrounded with, well-funded operations, they're recruiting people to serve on school boards, using lots of dollars to market their candidates, where this organization doesn't have those dollars. It has all of you, or me even, working still at the polls. I feel like a lot of times when a school like that closes, is there data to show that a lot of that is a profit-driven choice, that they are simply not bringing in the bucks that they want to bring in there? I would like to say, I know it sounds jaded, but I feel like a lot of it's profit.
I think I agree with you. The reason we were closing was because we didn't have enough money to stay open. That was the reason that was given to us. However, we had a sister school across town. And when I looked at the board notes, and it was also because of test scores, was what one board member said in a public forum. And that sister school had something called a resource where an outside company came in to help their students to pass the tests. We didn't have that. And there were other resources that, as I compared the two schools that were in the same, run by the same manager, one was being resourced because there was a plan to separate from our education management company, which was the out-of-town organization that ran our charter schools in the city and also a big area. They were going to separate from that company to be an independent entity, and they still are today, but it was an intentional separating, and the board decided to close our school. We had a lot of problems, and we didn't have the resources to address all of the problems, you know, mental health, homelessness. Some students wanted to get arrested so they would have a place to sleep. You know, we're dealing with issues like that, or issues where if there was a long break, I could expect one of my students or someone at the school had died. I mean, this is the kind of trauma. And then we had to also take NWA, we had to take all these other tests and prepare for these tests. It was just ridiculous. We had tests like 3 times a month. And this is no joke. And of course, the grading scale is also interesting. You know, A, B, C. Some odd number. We didn't go below a C. And it just blew my mind. And I'm an old school kind of girl. It's just different.
If the mantra is to save those students, that's why we're coming in here. Save those students, yeah, that abandonment, things don't play.
There's an argument out there that is really not about the students. It's really about profit, and it's also about reinvesting in urban's poor, you know, bringing the tax dollars back into the city, so we could draw more tax and, you know, increase the tax base in a particular city, replanting cities. That's the argument that I've been hearing around the country. It's not about the students or equity, you know, equity language has been co-opted. I'm really more about getting justice and fixing the system so that we can really have true access to proper education for all students.
One more question, I think, back here.
Not a question, just 2 quick points. One, a point of focus, and another one, a point of encouragement, particularly to this Washington Township School District. Well, first, the focus. I think what's, for the most part tonight, what I haven't heard directly is a focus on parents. We've had 4 children. They've run the gamut in different schools, public, private, and we've seen it all. And the one big difference, common denominator difference, positive or negative, but that kid doing well or not, as we've got to know lots of parents in different schools, different types of schools, is parents. And how serious they take their children and their children's education, even though they're sending them off to a school, they're not homeschooling, for sure. It's the involvement of the parent leading that kid and being a partner with that school, whatever school that is. And we've seen it rise and fall based upon that. And if the parent is involved and serious about their kid's education, he thrives, she thrives. If they're not, rich and poor, we've seen it. They're C students or they're failing. So I think, and being this parent council, it's a good thing because you're here tonight and it's a matter of us as parents of how involved and serious are we for our kids, no matter where they're going. So that's a focus point that I think we often overlook. Okay? The other thing is a point of encouragement. So my last one is a senior at North Central this year, okay? We live in Carmel. We've lived there 20 years. Why did we go to North Central? And I was raised in Carmel, okay? People look at us like, are you on drugs? What are you doing? You go out of your way to go out of district? Yeah, because we did our homework. And I'll tell you, at least in our estimation and our research, that Carmel, though they are a good school academically, they're overrated. And North Central, we chose North Central and Washington Township because we thought overall it was a better school academic. And guess what? It is. We've had 4 years here, and I will tell you, I've known the teachers personally, most of them. They're excellent teachers, just as good as Carmel. Okay, better. And so I say that because my last point, I think, is that in some ways, to Washington Township school districts, you don't have anything to worry about. Because if if you guys are doing a good job, which I think most of you are, teachers and administrators, which I know personally, you don't have to worry about kids leaving, okay? And even though 10% of that money that still saves the school that they leave, okay? It used to be a third, but now it's down to 10%. Okay, but it still remains, if each school is doing their best, then there shouldn't be any worry about losing kids and families. So it goes back to parents stuff. Am I involved with my kid in thriving in his education? Yes or no? And that's going to tell. Okay. And Washington, you have nothing to worry about. I will tell you. And I know teachers, even in the middle school, they're struggling and they're good people. Okay. And where are the parents? I applaud Dean Johnson at Northview. He's trying to start a parent university. And I said, that's one step forward, man. Because if we can't get the parents involved, it doesn't matter how good your teaching faculty is. It doesn't. I'm telling you that.
I need to interject here. Parents are extremely important to student success. However, Washington Township does not have the privilege, to use that word, to relax. for about 5 to 7 years now, at least 5 years, you've been on the Mind Trust's radar. The Mind Trust is an incubator for school leaders, as they advertise, but they are out. They are the main machine that produces some of these charter district partnerships. And you have been on the list as one of the school districts. My school district is also under attack for a high achievement gap or a big achievement gap. So you have means to work, and one way that they can infiltrate is through your school board. By having what happened in IPS, one privatizer at a time, until they got control of the board. And then it doesn't matter how many, the marketing is exceptional. I'm a proud graduate of Arsenal Technical High School's Math Science Magnet, which is one of the top programs in the state. We used to kick butt in math and science with all the districts back in the 90s. Even the Constitution team, we were third in the nation. And you don't know that because we didn't have very good marketing back in those days. But the marketing can skew the positive stuff that happens in your school district to a way that make you want to run. I was one of those parents. I never wanted my kid to go to, that school district. I wanted my kids to go to a private education, have a private education with religious background. And when I put them in the real world, my kids were so lost. They didn't know who they were. And we are proud public school parents now, but because they needed that diversity, because they navigated a world that, is not as sheltered as where they were. But the bottom line is Washington Township does need to be on high alert. And the parents need to be organized. You need to pay attention to the legislature. You also need to pay attention to your school board candidates. And you also need to keep the momentum up.
It's nice like tonight that make me a proud superintendent. You took your time tonight, first, courage for the Parent Council Network to even tackle this topic. More applause to the attendees, from teachers to staff to parents, coming together for this important conversation to protect the integrity of public schools in Washington Township. So I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, Parent Council Network, and to all the attendees. And Tanya, really, you drove home what I was about to say, which was, why did we do all this? We brought you here tonight. We put a bunch of information in front of you, but what's the action item? And the point is to keep your eyes open, pay attention, and ask questions. It's a school board election year. The school board election is going to be critical because I will tell you, those people who have an interest in changing the makeup of Washington Township via our school board, they also have a lot of money. So we don't have that, but we do have you. We have people that care about our kids, who care about our district, and who love our district, and who think that this is a fantastic district who's doing great things, and we want to stay on that trajectory. On that note, one of the things that Parent Council does is that we offer an endorsement of our organization to school board candidates. Anyone running for school board can apply to receive our endorsement, and they can go through our vetting process. And we assemble a committee. It's not just our board members, it's parents from all across the district who sit on that committee, who ask some of these tough questions and find out where our school board candidates stand. So if you have an interest in being a part of that committee, please feel free to come talk to myself or to Brian after this. We would love to meet you and learn more about you, because we're starting to form that now. That's gonna start kicking into high gear over the summer. And I mean, it's already April 20th. So, election season will be here before you know it. But really the point is just to equip you and empower you to start asking questions. If someone comes to you saying, I heard about the achievement gap in Washington Township. Now you have the information, the empowerment to say, what do you mean by that? Where did you get that term from? What are you thinking of when you think that? Can we talk through what that means? When you see talk about, new school models, or hear that new schools are opening, you can start to ask those questions about, well, why is that school opening? Or why is this school that has been a part of our community for so long, now closing? One of the things that Brian and I have talked about recently is, if you look at Indianapolis, there's not currently a public high school in the IPS district north of 38th Street. There's Shortridge High School, And then if you're just thinking about kind of the Midtown border, there is nothing until you get up to 86th Street and North Central. And how did that happen? And what does that mean to our community? What is the impact of that on our broader community? So these are just questions that we can start asking and thinking about. I would also say if this is a topic that has grabbed your interest, to follow the Indiana Coalition for Public Education on social media. They have a lot of great resources. And also as election season comes up, talk to those folks that are running for state senate, state legislator. They're making a lot of those policies that we heard about, things like vouchers. Ask those folks where they stand. Ask those folks who's donating to their campaign. Ask them where they stand on public education and really press them on it. Not just, oh yeah, of course, nobody's gonna come out and tell you they don't support schools, because that'd be a bad move. But this is just an equipping session for you all. So just to echo Dr. Whitson, we really appreciate you all being here. If you are interested in School Board Candidate Committee, let myself or Brian know, and please join us for our next meeting. Our final meeting of the school year will be the 3rd Wednesday in May, right back here. We'll be voting on our board slate for next year. We'll be talking more about School Board Candidate Committee, and we'll be doing lots of planning for the new school year. Yes?
Can I just say how important that school board candidate screening is? A long time ago, along with the district, my 3 kids graduated from here. I still live in the community, and I'm still involved in the advancement center and everything. I have a lot of people who ask, they say, Susie, I know you're still kind of involved. Who do I vote for on the school board? So when you guys make these decisions, when you I did it back in the day, when you interview these candidates and you slate these candidates, it's not just about parents and teachers and who they might vote for. It's the community at large. So I just am putting a plug in for that, how important this process is and how much the rest of us depend on it. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm gonna hand it over to Brian.
Everybody go home. Thank you for coming out. Please join parent council. Please get involved, and hopefully we will see you next month. Thank you. And thank you to our panel.
Great job.